Hi, my name's Adele Newman, and I want to share my story of being redeemed by the blood of Jesus Christ. My mom was Italian, and my mother had 4 children, and my mom had wrestled with a mental health disability from early on. Her parents were divorced. Her father left her for another woman, and she suffered that greatly during that time period. And then she met my dad, who was a very handsome sailor, and she fell madly in love, and they got married and had 4 children. But he was a wanderer, and so he ended up leaving her for another woman after having the 4 children. And she snapped. She just lost it. And so she went into a psych ward, and the state, New York State, came in and took all 4 of us children, and we went into foster care. I was 3 years old when that happened, and at first the 4 of us were in one home, a family home, and then we bounced. There were times when I would be with my sister in a group home, and my brothers would be in a boys' home, and then there were times when I would be with one brother in homes, but over the years we were never back together, all 4 of us. However, during our early foster home years, I had been sexually abused by one of the male family members of the woman who was doing our foster care. Between 3 and 4. Okay. And it was an adult man, and I won't go into detail, but it wasn't pleasant. And so that was my first experience, and didn't say anything to anybody about it. Okay. We actually were in foster care till I was in the 5th grade, and there were several, quite a few different homes. Probably about 8, I think, 6 to 8 somewhere. And you know what? There's so much of my childhood that I've kind of don't remember. I think it's the sovereignty of the Lord as well. But during the foster care years, we would see my mother once a month, first Sunday of every month, and then all 4 of us would get together and we'd actually spend time with my mother. And those visits, and because they were brief and they were only once a month, were always pleasant, and we were always doing wonderful things. And so I had started to build up this hope and this fantasy that my mother was this wonderful person, and that she was going to rescue us from all this abuse and all this horribleness of foster care. So I was holding on to that. One day we're all going to be together, and we're all going to have this wonderful home, and my wonderful mother is going to come, and it was just this huge fantasy. And then when I was in the 5th grade, my mom had been released from the psychiatric care, and she had met my stepfather, and they got married, and they got us out of foster care. Right. In one of the foster care homes, I was younger. I was somewhere in elementary school, and she was a teenager, and she just hated me, and she would just beat me and just be very, very abusive to me, but I wouldn't say anything to anybody. I just kept holding it in.
Why would you hold
and
that?
Looking back now, the only thing I remembered, I was petrified of her. I was so afraid of her. And the only thing I can think of is I was more afraid of what she would do to me if I ratted her out than telling somebody she was doing this. Of course, it's not rational, but there's a child being abused, being victimized, and so it always stuck with me that children are so resilient and they can hold so much in, that adults need to be so protective and see warning signs and get a picture together even beyond what the child is admitting. Because
Sure.
If someone were to say to me, "Is she beating you?" I would say no. So that's something that stayed with me, especially from my mom with me. She did a lot of screaming, more abuse physical with my siblings than with me. But yeah, there was a lot. Yeah, that was a huge reality check, which started to develop my independence, my resilience, my stubbornness. That's where it was getting stronger and stronger that I was going to be a survivor. So that has, I can see where that came in, that I went into survival mode, and knew quickly that my mom wasn't going to be this protective person that I loved and loved me, and I just felt alone. And so I kind of went into taking care of my younger sister, nurturing her and protecting her. And during those years,
Sure.
it didn't start developing until I was I didn't start recognizing it until I was in high school. that's when I started. And this was prior to those years. I had been sexually abused by a family member, and he would bribe me and say, if you don't allow me to do this, I'll tell your mother what you did, if whatever I did. And I was afraid of the consequences of my mother, so I would allow the abuse so I wouldn't be in trouble with her. Then I became promiscuous. Yes, I did. I sure did, which I regret. I became promiscuous as a teenager in high school, and I think because by that time it didn't, violating my body was just something that didn't seem to be, I was already violated. So I didn't see it as we need to keep ourselves pure. I wasn't pure. I was already violated. So that wasn't a thought or a concern by the time I was in high school.
Okay.
And that's the only thing I can look back. Of course, as a child, we're not rationalizing all this, and we're not thinking therapeutically. As an adult looking back, I do start looking at it saying, well, maybe this was why this happened.
Sure.
I was 17 in the 12th grade in high school, senior, and I met this man preaching on the side of the road, and so 2 months later, I turned 18, and then we got married, and he was older, about a little over 5 years older, and I was still in high school, but I wanted to get out of that craziness. Prior to that, when I was in the 12th grade, a senior, I had a boyfriend who was black, and this is back in '75 when that was taboo in interracial relationships, and so my mother and stepfather found out about this boyfriend and really beat the crud out of me, and so it was a really worse situation in the home after that than it was prior to that. Yeah, mostly my mother was not physically abusive to me. Mostly it was screaming rages and stuff. And then and I did notice that she was more physically abusive to my sister than me. But years later, after she had become a Christian and she had repented, she shared with me that when she was getting ready to beat me, I would look up at her and say, please don't beat me. And that would stop her. She shared that. That was amazing. Okay. Got married, I was just turned 18, and then before I was 19, or right at 19, then I had my first son. And I loved him so much. He was so precious. The marriage was really not healthy and not good, and I was miserable. And I didn't enjoy intimacy at all. It was absolutely horrible. But I did love my son, because when I was in high school, I was attracted to this one particular friend of mine, a female. And so I didn't understand. This is way back in the day when homosexuality wasn't common discussion, so I didn't know anything about homosexuality, but I remembered sharing with my boyfriend that I had this physical attraction to my female friend, and I didn't understand it. And so he said, oh, that's natural. And so I thought, oh, really? And so I didn't think anything was abnormal about it. However, when I was married, I knew the intimacy, this was not normal, that I didn't like this, that this was, not a good thing.
Yeah.
Yes, I did. I did feel like I was raised Catholic, and I did feel like if I were to divorce, I would go to hell. And so I felt like I was stuck in this marriage and couldn't leave, even though I wanted out. But when my first child was born, that was the joy of my life, taking care of him and loved him so much. Very, very, very good time. Yes. Then 2 years later, I had my second son. However, my second son, when I got pregnant, I was very, very distraught. That really, I cried when they told me I was pregnant. I just cried because I was in this loveless marriage and I felt trapped. And then having another child to take care of just added to the sort of bondage. However, when he was born, he was just so, I loved him so much. I was so thankful. And then I had these two little joys that I could escape into. So I would use that, my children, as an escape from being intimate with my husband, which I absolutely hated. So I would, oh, I'm going to lay down with the boys, or oh, I'm going to do this or that, and I would pretend I'm sleeping so I wouldn't have to be intimate, and just surrounded my whole life with my sons, and they were the joy of my life. Yes, throughout the whole marriage I worked and was major contributor to the finances of our family. In the beginning, when I had my boys, I would open up an in-home daycare in my home so I could be home with them. And then as they got older, I started working in the preschool where they were, and I developed a friendship with this coworker, and her and I had become really close. And I actually at that time was spending so much time with her, didn't even realize we'd work all day long, we'd talk on the phone in the evenings, we'd off days, we'd go places together. I mean, we spent all of our time together, and our relationship and our friendship just blossomed at that time. And as it blossomed, it turned into a love relationship where she confessed to me that she was a lesbian. And at that time I said, how does that work? I was very naive. It's embarrassing to say, but I was. And so she shared with me, and then we decided we were going to start a relationship. So we weren't intimate at that point, but I went to my husband and I said, well, I figured out what our problem is. I know why this marriage isn't working. I'm a lesbian, so that's why I haven't been enjoying intimacy with you. And so I'm going to get together with my friend here. And I, in my naivety, thought he would be, oh, so that's the problem, and this would be dissolve the marriage, and you go on your happy way. But that wasn't the outcome. He went into a rage and was furious and beat us and beat me, beat her, and it didn't end nicely. Not the night I told him. She was coming the next day because we had arranged I was going to leave. And so when she came the next day, he became really abusive with her. He ripped the wires out of her car, and I mean, he just went into a complete rage.
What about the children?
They saw it. Yes,
Wow.
they saw it. And so we went into hiding, her and I took the boys with me, and no, we just went to another state. Okay. And started out over in another state. But anyway, we stayed together. It was actually a very we were very happy together, and she was a very good person. And she loved the boys, and she was very good to them. And I finally, at that point in my life, felt like I finally found love. Prior to that, and I was 23, I never felt loved. I never felt protected. I always was afraid. I was always alone. And I always looked for and longed for a loving relationship. And this was the first time in my life that I felt safe and loved. And there was no question in my mind that she would do anything for me, that she loved me unconditionally. And it was a happy, healthy relationship. And then we used to work opposite shifts. So I would go to work, and a friend of ours used to come over. He was a straight guy, and we started drinking. We started drinking and smoking pot and going to clubs. Not as much going to clubs, but we did do drinking and smoking pot. And one of our getting high buddies would come over. He was straight, and in the beginning he would start hitting on me, and that didn't work out, and so then he started hitting on her. And so one night I came home and all her bags were packed, and he had been telling her, sharing the Bible and saying, you were living in sin and you need to get out of this relationship. So she was going to pack up and leave me because he was saying it was a sinful relationship. Yes, however, okay, so they did get together and they got married, but then he ended up leaving her. I think because my mom had severe depression and mental health disabilities, I also shared a lot. I had a lot of rage, I had a lot of depression. I was not a healthy person emotionally. And so when she left me, I didn't even want to live anymore. I was just, that's it. I wanted to check out. And my mother at that time took my two boys, and they were 4 years old and 2 years old at that time. And she took custody. I think she knew what was going on with me. And I just rebelled completely from God. I wanted nothing to do with God. I thought, if a loving Father, all these years of me not being loved and finally finding love, and if it's because of this loving Father that I no longer have this relationship, I don't want to have anything to do with this. That's when I fell really into darkness. I started doing a lot of drinking. I was a functioning alcoholic. After several months of my mother keeping my boys, I did get a job. I got a place, a very small place, and got my boys back. However, I was a functioning alcoholic. I was drinking and partying whenever I wasn't working, and just completely miserable, and constantly looking for that same relationship, and going through so many different women and so many different, just searching, very miserable, very depressed, and years, and I'd get in a relationship and I would think this is it, and then that wouldn't work out. And it was usually me all the time that would end the relationship. It just wasn't. I was comparing it, and and I was going from 23 years old, so I was 25 when she had left, and so from 25 till I was about, actually till I was 34, I was actively in not healthy, serious drugs, alcohol, bars, partying, and very out in the gay community, very liberal, very proud of it, and marching on Washington, D.C. with the gay population, bumper stickers, just very out. So I would go out clubbing all the time, and then I'd get into relationships, and then it would start out okay, and my sons were growing up in this environment, and at the time I didn't think it was any trouble. I thought, this is who I am, and you need to accept me for who I am. Well, my oldest son was very anti. He did not like that I was gay, and he didn't like that he was thrown into this lifestyle. My oldest son at the time, he was very angry towards me, disobedient. He was just very challenging to raise, very headstrong, very disrespectful, and wasn't at all on page with this, And my other son was always very easy to get along with, and much easier to raise, and he and I had a much more closer relationship, and he wasn't opposed, and he was just easier to raise. It was really going so far down. I was searching for love, and trying to find that peace within, but it was the complete opposite that I was doing to obtain it. Heavy into drinking and drugs and bar scene, and searching, and constantly one relationship after the other. They were the most 2 years. So then continuing this cycle, I was constantly looking for love. So then there were times I thought, well, I'll try being with a man. I'll try to have this normal life and fit in, and so I would be promiscuous with a man, and that didn't work, hated it, and so I went right back to, well, I must be a lesbian then, I can't do this. So then during those really low, dark times, twice I had gotten pregnant, and twice I had an abortion terminated, not even thinking twice about what I did, no thought whatsoever of what I was doing. This was an inconvenience, and terminated it. Just get this out of my life. Yes. I think where I didn't bring into the story is way back when I was young, very, very young. I remembered having a friendship with God throughout all my childhood and growing up. I always felt like He was my friend and He was always there. And when I had nobody to talk to, I would talk to Him and I would pray to Him. And I just always felt like He was with me. Yes. At 18, I was listening to the street preacher, and this is during the Jesus movement back in the 70s, and he was talking about you have to be born again and you need to receive Jesus, and I was like, yes, I want to do that. I believe in Jesus and I want Him to be my Lord and Savior. So I'd asked Him into my heart and I became born again. First lover. I was so happy and so in love, and I felt so loved, and so didn't ever want that relationship to end. I would have, till death do us part. But when she left me for God, and that was her reason for leaving me, I didn't want to have anything to do with that type of a God. Okay. And so I turned my back. I said, no, if you're going to do this and take away the one love I had in my life, then we're not friends. I don't want to have a relationship with you, and I don't want to talk to you. And so I turned from God, and I went into the drinking and drugs and the depravity, and I went all the way down and running from Him. Little by little, I started yearning to regain that friendship, little by little. And then I flipped open the Bible. I wanted to get right with Him. I wanted to get back that friendship. And so I flipped open to Isaiah 54. And I started reading the story of me, how I was a child, wife at youth, and turned my back from the Lord, and that the Lord waited and called me back, and that with ever-loving kindness He's called me back. And that touched my heart. It just spoke to my years of troubled childhood and youth, and how now I wanted to get back with Him, and that was possible. I had a promiscuous relationship, short-term, with a man, and hated it, and then found out I was pregnant. So actually at that time, since I had already decided I wanted to get right with God, and my heart was turning, I knew I couldn't terminate this pregnancy. Wow. This was not going to happen. In my first few weeks of the pregnancy, I found out the baby had Down syndrome. The fetus, they did the amnio testing, and I was told the baby had Down syndrome and that I should terminate the pregnancy. I wasn't in a relationship because that was just a short-term, whatever. But anyway, I wasn't in a relationship, and so these genetic counselors were tag teaming me, all 5 of them, giving me all their reasons why I should terminate this baby. So at that point in my life, I had my 2 sons were 14 and 16 years old when I found out I was pregnant, and there was no way I wanted to have another baby. I was not wanting to go back to that. I had 16 years single parent, been there, done that, didn't want to go there anymore, and so having another baby was not at all what I wanted. However, I had decided I wanted to get right with God, so I knew there was no way I was going to terminate this pregnancy, even though I didn't want it at all at that point. So what had happened was, after the genetic counselors were tag teaming me, giving me all the reasons why I should terminate, yes, and me not knowing anything about Down syndrome, was somehow agreeing, but knowing I couldn't do it, finally I just said, I don't know how I'm going to do this, but I know if God gave me this baby, He was going to help me raise this baby, and I was not going to be alone. Absolutely. I have always been a lover of children. I love children, and especially babies. They're so cute and innocent and just so adorable, and that has always been just one of my things. And the only thing, looking back, that would have taken me out of that lifestyle would have been a baby to take care of, my baby. I couldn't drink, I couldn't do drugs, I couldn't party. I just wanted to give everything to this baby, to raising this baby, and God knew that. But however, at the time of getting pregnant, I was a lesbian. So this was really embarrassing with my friends. Here I am, a lesbian, pregnant, How does that happen? And so I ended up kind of shying away. I couldn't go to bars anymore, and the bigger I got, definitely. And so I stopped going to the bars, and my friends were kind of weaning out, out of my life. The few friends that decided to stick around were really hammering me to have an abortion, and they couldn't understand why I wasn't going to have an abortion. And I didn't know what all to say to them, except I want to get right with God. I just want to do the right thing. And so I kept trying to pursue that, and reading the Bible, and just reading the Bible, getting to know what God said, what was His Word. It was totally transforming me, totally changing me. Okay, so I started reading Romans chapter 1, and in my quest to get to know God and know His Word. And as I was reading Romans, I was feeling very condemned. And I started realizing it was very, very explicit. It wasn't at all what I was learning in the gay church I was going to. Whereas in the gay church, we learned that David and Jonathan had a homosexual relationship. And so I thought, oh, okay, and God is okay with this, and this is how I was born, and this is who I am. I'm a lesbian. But there was a contradiction when I was reading Romans. I started seeing, oh, wait a minute, this is not something the Lord approves of. And I started feeling I needed to change. Being a lesbian was something that the Lord didn't have a plan for me. That wasn't who I was. But the thing that touched my heart was I couldn't change. I didn't know how to change. That was beyond me. And I remembered as I was reading it, I just dropped down and I just started crying out to God. And I said, Lord God, I hear what you're saying, but this is who I am. How do I change who I am? I can't do it. I can't do it. But you can. And that was really what I started believing. If this is what the Lord wanted to do, He would do it, that I didn't have to do it. That is like the bottom line of what I knew, how to come back to this friendship with God, was that He was going to change me. And the beauty of it was, I only had time to read the Word, because here I am starting this pregnancy and going into it. I can't party, I can't go do drugs and drinking and even cigarettes. The Lord took that away from me. I couldn't smoke cigarettes. I just wanted a healthy baby. Even though I was told the baby had Down syndrome, I believed the Lord was going to heal this baby, and the Lord was going to work on healing me. And so I just saturated myself in reading the Word. And the next 9 months of going through this pregnancy was growing in the Lord, and just growing and knowing Him more and knowing Him more. And after he was born, I remember looking at him. I was really afraid during the pregnancy. I battled with, what is this baby going to be like? I didn't know anything about Down syndrome. And I was really picturing worst case scenario, and also based on what the genetic counselors had shared with me, I really had worst case scenario in my brain. But after he was born, it was the most beautiful. I have to share with you, I really believed the Lord was going to heal Elijah from Down syndrome. And based on His Word, I was reading in the book of Kings where Elijah was being pursued by wicked Queen Jezebel, and that she wanted to kill him. And Elijah performed a miracle on Mount Moriah. Well, at the time, Elijah's father used to call his car Jezebel, and we lived on the extension of a road called Moriah. And I started reading thinking, oh, God's telling me He's going to heal this baby from Down syndrome. So I went from being very, very depressed of having an unwanted pregnancy plus a baby with a disability to thinking, oh, God was going to do a great miracle. He was going to heal this baby, and this baby was going to be born without Down syndrome. And so I spent the rest of the pregnancy believing that he was going to be born normal or typical, and so I was going to name this baby Elijah, and that was going to be the testimony, and people were going to say, well, how did you come up with the name Elijah? And I was going to say, because he was diagnosed Down syndrome, but he was born without Down syndrome. So what had happened was, when I went in to deliver the baby, all the doctors and nurses thought I was a complete fruitcake. Like, here is this crazy fanatic woman thinking this baby is going to be born without Down syndrome. Even at one point, the nurse was like, this baby has Down syndrome, and there is nothing that's going to change that. Your baby has Down syndrome. And I remember thinking in my head, well, she's going to become a believer in Jesus once she sees the baby was born without Down syndrome. So after the baby was born and I had to have a cesarean and they lifted him out, I said, does he? And the nurse said, yes, he has Down syndrome. My whole world collapsed. I couldn't believe it. And I was like, what? And so then I fell asleep. And during my sleep, I had this vision. I started hearing this cackling, evil laugh. And I remembered thinking, what is that? But it was wicked, wicked, evil laugh. And it sounded just like Satan. And Satan was saying, okay, your baby doesn't have Down syndrome. There is no God. I don't know what you're believing, but what are you going to name this baby? You can't call it Elijah because the baby was born with Down syndrome. And so I was, yes, you're right. What am I going to name this baby? And is there really a God? Am I really crazy? I just didn't understand. Everything just started to crumble again for me, just like when my lover left me. Is there really a God? Is he my friend? Everything started falling apart. But the next thing I saw was a really sad, sad face. And it was just like Jesus was so, so sad, and I broke his heart. And I thought, wow, I can't believe I'm going to put my faith in God on conditions. If you heal this baby, I'll believe in you. If you don't, I won't. And all of a sudden, I just didn't care what the Lord would give me or what the Lord would do, allow me to walk through. As long as I walked through it with the Lord, I would be okay. And so I repented again. I said, you know what? I'm so sorry, Lord, that I didn't want to receive what you had for me, and I rejected it. And so I said, you know what, Satan, you're a liar. I don't know why this baby wasn't healed. I know God could have healed the baby, but for some reason he didn't, and it's okay. And I'm going to name this baby Elijah. Backing up too, the other thing that I remember during my pregnancy was when before I started to believe the Lord was going to heal the baby, I was crying and I was so depressed, and I thought, wow, life had really sucked for me. I didn't even know why. I didn't want to live. And so I just took my Bible and I went to the park and I sat down and I was like, it really has not been a good road, Lord. I don't know. And I was just crying and crying. And I just flipped open my Bible and I looked down on Psalm 126, and it said, you that goes forth weeping, carrying precious seed, shall come again rejoicing. And I knew God was telling me, you're crying and you're really depressed and you're very upset. You have this unwanted pregnancy and this baby has Down syndrome, but one day you're going to come back rejoicing. And I said, how? How am I going to come back rejoicing? I didn't get it. But then after Elijah was born, and I saw how adorable and how precious, how wonderful, what a gift. And how the Lord uses the simple things to confound the wise, and how the Lord used Elijah to transform me, to teach me patience, to teach me love, to teach me to have hope and have faith, and just things aren't always what they seem, but God does have a plan for us, and He loves us. The Lord loves me. He loves me so unconditionally. So going from a broken, fractured, abused child into the loving arms of a loving Father wasn't an easy transition. I never knew a father. I never knew a loving man. I never knew love. But for the Lord to use this sweet baby to teach me love, and that He loves me all through it all. He loved me through being a lesbian. He loved me through all the mistakes I made. He just loved me. That's what captured me. That's what brought me out of bondage. That's what brought me out of darkness, was His love, and using that sweet little baby who I love so much today. And I thank the Lord for that. I'm very thankful. Praise God. To God be the glory.
Adele, that was a really powerful story, and
Wow.
you had never shared with me before why you named Elijah. And one thing that really stands out to me is the fact that, you know what? Jezebel didn't kill Elijah. He's right beside you.
Yes, that's
Elijah,
right.
It's a real honor to meet you.
Yes, welcome.
All right, great. Now, Adele, what's really amazing is we just met this week. And, what I find really powerful is that you are so dedicated to the Lord that you've even written your story out and you have a book.
Yes.
And so your book is called Adele's Journey. Can you hold it up a little bit for people to see? That's good. That's good. All right, and we're going to have that
we got
available
Elijah
for people as well. Look, there he is.
There he is.
Elijah on the back. That's you, isn't it, Elijah?
Yeah, it's right, Mother.
That's right. That's right.
There it is.
Adele, thank you so much.
You are welcome. To God be the glory.
You are to us as well.
Yes,
Thank you. Thank you. To God be the glory. Hallelujah.